What happens when one of America's most beloved television personalities walks into what he believes will be a warm, friendly interview, only to find himself trapped in one of the most uncomfortable moments of his career? That is exactly what unfolded when Steve Harvey appeared on The View, expecting light conversation and mutual respect, but instead facing a confrontation that quickly spiraled into chaos. What followed left the studio frozen, the audience divided, and viewers across the country debating who crossed the line. Before diving into the moment that shook daytime television, audiences were encouraged to subscribe, engage, and share their opinions, because what happened that day would permanently change how many people viewed talk show interviews. Steve Harvey walked onto the View set that Tuesday morning wearing his trademark confidence. He adjusted his suit jacket as he approached the guest chair, flashing the warm smile that had made him a household name for decades. The studio audience greeted him with enthusiastic applause, and for a moment, everything seemed perfectly normal. Whoopi Goldberg welcomed him with genuine excitement. Sarah Haynes smiled warmly, and Sunny Hostin nodded approvingly as he took his seat. But there was one noticeable contrast at the table. Joy Behar sat at the far end, arms crossed, her expression tight and unreadable. While the others leaned in with open body language, Joy remained rigid, watching Steve closely. "Everyone, please welcome Steve Harvey," Whoopi announced, prompting another round of applause. "Thank you for having me," Steve replied graciously. "It's always a pleasure to be with you ladies." The conversation began smoothly. Sarah Haynes kicked things off by congratulating Steve on his latest book about relationships, noting how quickly it was climbing bestseller lists. She asked what inspired him to write yet another guide for couples. Steve leaned forward, clearly in his element, drawing from decades of hosting Family Feud and engaging with thousands of families. He spoke passionately about communication, listening, and emotional understanding. He emphasized that most relationships fail not because of lack of love, but because people stop truly hearing one another. Sunny Hostin chimed in, praising the book's reception and its positive reviews. The atmosphere felt supportive, respectful, and productive. Then Joy shifted in her seat. "Steve," she said, her voice calm but sharp, "I've read your book, and I have to ask something." Steve chuckled lightly, attempting to keep the tone relaxed. "You look like you've been waiting to say something, Joy." Joy's eyes narrowed slightly. "Don't you think it's a bit hypocritical for someone who's been married 3 times to be giving relationship advice?" The studio fell silent. The audience stopped clapping. The co-hosts exchanged uneasy glances. Even Steve's smile wavered, just briefly, before he composed himself again. "Joy," he replied carefully, "I believe my experiences, both the successes and the failures, give me valuable insight. Every relationship teaches you something if you're willing to learn." But Joy wasn't finished. "You've openly discussed your divorces," she pressed. "So how can you sit here and tell other people how to make their marriages work when you couldn't make yours work?" Whoopi attempted to intervene, sensing the tension rising. "I think what Steve is saying—" "No, Whoopi," Joy interrupted sharply. "Let him answer. Our viewers deserve to know why they should trust his advice." Steve's jaw tightened. His voice remained controlled, but the strain was unmistakable. "I've been happily married to my wife, Marjorie, for over 15 years. He said, we have a strong blended family. I made mistakes in the past, and I learned from them. That's what growth looks like." Joy scoffed. "Or is it just good marketing, turning personal failure into profit?" The audience began murmuring. Sarah looked visibly uncomfortable. Sunny leaned forward, ready to step in, but Joy continued, "And another thing," she added. "Your comedy from the 1990, some of that material about women hasn't aged well. How do we know your advice today isn't rooted in outdated thinking?" Steve set his coffee mug down with a noticeable thud. "I came here to talk about helping people," he said firmly, "not to be attacked over jokes I told decades ago. Comedy evolves, people evolve, do they?" Joy shot back. "Because it looks like you're profiting from advice on something you've struggled with your entire life." The tension was now unbearable. Whoopi tried once more to redirect the conversation toward the book's positive impact, but this time Steve stopped her. "No," he said calmly but firmly. "Joy wants to have this conversation. Let's have it." He turned directly toward Joy. "You're trying to tear me down in front of millions of people. Why, what's your agenda?" Joy leaned back, clearly unfazed. My agenda is truth, and your defensiveness says a lot. Defensive? Steve's voice rose slightly. You're questioning my marriage, my integrity, my career. And you expect me to smile. Joy smirked. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what happens when you ask legitimate questions. That was the breaking point. Steve stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I'm not falling apart, he said. I'm calling out unprofessional behavior. This isn't journalism. It's character assassination. The studio froze. Some audience members gasped. Others covered their mouths. The co-hosts were stunned, unsure how to respond. Sit down, Steve. Joy commanded coldly. You're embarrassing yourself. Steve laughed bitterly. Embarrassing myself? You've spent 10 minutes trying to humiliate me on national television. And you think I'm the problem. What's embarrassing is a grown woman who thinks bullying makes good TV. Joy's face flushed red. Bullying? She snapped back. And at that moment, daytime television crossed a line that viewers would not soon forget. If you can't handle that, Joy said coolly, her voice edged with sarcasm, then maybe you shouldn't be on talk shows. The words landed like a slap. Legitimate questions. Steve repeated, his voice rising now, no longer controlled, no longer polished for television. You started this interview with an attack. You didn't ask about my book. You didn't ask about my family, my work, or my philanthropy. You didn't ask why people connect with what I do. You went straight for the throat. That's not journalism. He paused, scanning the table, then the audience. It's a hit job. Oh, please, Joy scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. You're being dramatic. This is how interviews work in the real world, Steve. We don't just throw you softballs so you can sit there and promote your book. That did it. Steve pointed directly at her, the last remnants of his composure slipping away. Joy, I've done thousands of interviews in my career, he said sharply. Every major network, every major show, I know the difference between tough questions and personal attacks. What you're doing right now is the latter. The studio felt like it had stopped breathing. Whoopi Goldberg, who had been watching silently, finally leaned forward. Maybe we should take a commercial break, she suggested carefully, trying to de-escalate before things went any further. No, Steve said immediately, his voice firm, decisive. No breaks. Joy started this, and we're going to finish it right here, right now. Joy crossed her arms and leaned back in her chair, chin raised in defiance. Fine, she said. Let's finish it. You want to talk about personal attacks. Let's talk about how you built a career stereotyping women. And now you're trying to rebrand yourself as a relationship guru. The hypocrisy is stunning. Steve's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Joy, he said slowly, deliberately, you clearly have some personal issue with me, because this level of hostility isn't normal. Did I offend you somehow? Did I hurt your feelings at some industry event? Because this feels personal. Don't flatter yourself. Joy snapped back. This isn't personal. This is about accountability. You don't get to reinvent yourself and expect everyone to forget your past. My past? Steve echoed, disbelief cracking through his voice. Joy, my past includes growing up homeless, sleeping in my car, being broke, hungry, and humiliated while trying to survive. My past includes working my way up from nothing to build a media empire that employs hundreds of people. He gestured broadly, emotion spilling over now. My past includes giving millions to charity, mentoring young comedians, creating opportunities for people who look like me and people who don't. But you want to reduce all of that to jokes I told 30 years ago. Oh, here comes the sob story. Joy waved dismissively. Plenty of people overcome adversity without making degrading comments about women along the way. A low murmur rippled through the audience. Sarah Haynes finally spoke, her voice tentative but strained. I think we're losing sight of it. No, Steve interrupted, turning briefly toward her before refocusing on Joy. This is exactly the point. She's not interested in context. She's not interested in growth. She's interested in tearing me down. Joy leaned forward now, eyes sharp. Growth requires accountability, Steve. And accountability means owning the harm you caused, not hiding behind success stories and charity checks. I've owned my mistakes, Steve shot back. I've apologized. I've changed. What more do you want? Public flogging? Cancellation. You don't get to decide when redemption expires. Joy smirked. Redemption isn't something you declare for yourself. Steve shook his head slowly. And judgment isn't something you weaponize. The tension was unbearable. The co-host sat frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let the moment play out. The audience was split, some nodding along with Steve, others murmuring in agreement with Joy. You know what this is, Steve continued, voice steady but burning. This is performative outrage. This is you playing prosecutor, judge, and jury, all because it makes good television. Or, Joy shot back, it's someone finally challenging you instead of treating you like America's favorite uncle. Steve let out a sharp laugh. I don't need to be anyone's favorite anything. I came here to talk about helping people build better relationships, not to be ambushed. And yet, Joy replied coolly, here we are. Whoopi finally raised her hand. Okay, we need to slow this down. But Steve wasn't done. You accuse me of hypocrisy, he said. But what's more hypocritical than preaching compassion while publicly humiliating someone? You want accountability. Start with yourself. Joy stiffened. I'm doing my job. No, Steve said firmly. You're crossing a line. The room went silent again. Sonny Hostin glanced toward the producer's off-camera. Sarah looked visibly shaken. Whoopi sighed deeply, rubbing her temples. Steve, Joy said quietly, if you can't take scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be positioning yourself as an authority. Steve met her gaze without blinking. And if you can't challenge someone without disrespect, maybe you shouldn't be conducting interviews. A beat passed, then another. The applause that followed was hesitant, scattered, but real. Joy leaned back, lips pressed thin. Steve slowly sat down, breathing heavy, his expression a mix of anger, disappointment, and resolve. Daytime television had just crossed into something raw, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. And millions of viewers knew they had just witnessed a moment that would be replayed, debated, and dissected for years to come. Joy, maybe we should stay out of this, one of the co-hosts said cautiously, her voice barely cutting through the tension. Steve clearly wants to have this conversation, but Joy cut her off sharply, her patience clearly gone. No, if he wants to talk, then let's talk. Steve stepped closer to the table, no longer trying to hide his anger. His voice rose, echoing through the studio. You know what, Joy, you're right. I do want to have this conversation, he said. Because I'm tired of people like you thinking they can tear down someone's entire life's work just because they don't like jokes from decades ago. The audience shifted in their seats. I've apologized for anything that was inappropriate. Steve continued, his voice edged with frustration. I've grown, I've evolved, I've changed, but that's still not enough for people like you, is it? People like you? Joy repeated sharply, her eyebrows shooting upward. What exactly do you mean by that, Steve? Steve didn't hesitate. I mean people who are so miserable in their own lives that they need to tear others down just to feel important. He fired back. You're sitting here on national television trying to humiliate me, not because it serves the audience, but because it makes you feel powerful. A collective gasp rippled through the studio. Several audience members visibly recoiled. One woman covered her mouth in shock. Joy's face flushed a deep, angry red. How dare you, she snapped. You don't know anything about my life. I know enough, Steve replied firmly, unwavering. Happy people don't go out of their way to tear others down. Secure people don't ambush guests on their own show. And professional journalists don't let personal grudges turn interviews into circuses. Joy slammed her hand on the table, the sharp sound startling everyone. You want to talk about a circus, she shouted. You're the one standing up and screaming like a child who didn't get his way. I'm standing, Steve roared back, because you've been disrespecting me for the last 15 minutes, and I'm not going to sit here and take it anymore. The room felt like it might explode. You think because you're behind that desk you can attack my character, my marriage, my career, and I'm supposed to smile and say thank you. Steve continued, that's not happening. Whoopi Goldberg stood slightly, raising her hands in a calming gesture. Everybody, let's just take a breath. No, Whoopi, Steve said, turning toward her, his voice intense but respectful. I appreciate you trying, I really do, but I need to say this. He turned back to Joy. This ambush was planned, he said, From the moment I walked in, this wasn't about tough questions. This wasn't about accountability. This was about humiliating me on television. Joy leaned forward aggressively, her eyes blazing. Nobody planned anything, she snapped. You're paranoid, Steve. I asked legitimate questions about your credibility, and you completely melted down. And this reaction, is exactly why people question your advice. My credibility. Steve laughed bitterly, shaking his head. Joy, what's your credibility? The studio went dead silent. What relationships have you saved? Steve asked. What families have you helped? What marriages have you strengthened? What positive impact have you made on anyone's life? Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Steve kept going. All you do is sit behind that desk and tear people down for entertainment, he said. You call it journalism, but it's cheap provocation. I'm a journalist, Joy shouted, her voice cracking with fury. You're not a journalist, Steve exploded back. You're a talk show host with an attitude problem. Gasps erupted from the audience again. Real journalists. Steve continued, pointing toward her. Ask tough questions with respect. They seek truth, not humiliation. They challenge ideas without destroying people. Joy stood up now, unable to remain seated. You don't get to define journalism, she shouted. Especially not someone who's built his career on stereotypes and ego. And you don't get to rewrite my life's work to fit your narrative, Steve shot back. I've worked too hard. I've sacrificed too much. And I won't let you reduce my entire journey to a punchline. The co-hosts were frozen. Producers off camera were visibly panicking. The audience was split, some clapping quietly for Steve, others murmuring in disbelief. This is exactly why daytime television is broken, Steve said, his voice calmer now but heavy with conviction. You don't want conversation. You want conflict. You don't want truth. You want moments that go viral. Joy scoffed. You're deflecting. No, Steve said, I'm done pretending. He took a step back, scanning the room. I came here in good faith, he said. I came here to talk about growth, healing, and helping people. And instead, I was treated like a defendant in a courtroom with no defense. Joy crossed her arms, her expression hard. If you can't handle scrutiny, she said coldly, maybe you shouldn't put yourself out there. And if you can't treat guests with basic human respect, Steve replied, maybe you shouldn't be hosting interviews. The silence that followed was deafening. No music, no applause cue, just raw, uncomfortable reality playing out live on television. Steve slowly sat back down, breathing deeply. Joy remained standing for a moment longer before sitting as well, her jaw clenched. Daytime television had crossed a line, one that viewers at home would debate endlessly, and everyone in that studio knew one thing for certain. This was no longer just an interview. It was a reckoning. They don't ambush their guests and then act shocked when those guests finally fight back. By now, the studio was in complete chaos. Audience members whispered frantically to one another, some nervously laughing, others visibly uncomfortable. A few people discreetly pulled out their phones, sensing they were witnessing something that would be replayed endlessly online. The co-hosts sat frozen, faces tight with anxiety, unsure whether stepping in would calm the situation or make it explode further. Joy stood up fully now, facing Steve across the table like an opponent in a courtroom showdown. You know what your real problem is, Steve, she said sharply. You can't handle being challenged by a woman. That's what this is really about. Steve's eyes widened in disbelief. Are you kidding me right now? He said, shaking his head. Joy, some of the strongest people in my life are women. My wife, my daughters, my mother who raised me. This has nothing to do with you being a woman. He took a step forward, voice firm and unyielding. This has everything to do with you being unprofessional and nasty. Nasty. Joy's voice jumped an octave. I'm nasty for asking hard questions. You're nasty for how you ask them. Steve fired back. You didn't ask hard questions. You made accusations. You didn't interview me. You attacked me. And now you're trying to make this about gender because you know you're wrong. I am not wrong about anything, Joy screamed. You came on this show expecting us to fawn all over you and promote your book. When I asked real questions, you couldn't handle it. Real questions? Steve repeated incredulously. Joy, your first question called me a hypocrite. Your second attacked my past marriages. Your third dragged up comedy material from the 90s. Those weren't questions. That was a setup. The audience murmured loudly now, tension thick in the air. Maybe we should all just calm down. Sunny Hostin finally said, her voice careful but firm. Don't tell me to calm down. Steve and Joy shouted simultaneously, glaring at each other across the table. The room fell briefly silent again. This is unbelievable, Steve muttered, running both hands through his hair. I came here to talk about helping couples communicate better. Instead, I'm being attacked by someone who clearly has never learned how to have a respectful conversation. Joy pointed straight at him. The only person being disrespectful here is you. She snapped. You're the one yelling. You're the one who made this personal. I made this personal. Steve's voice cracked with disbelief. Joy, you started this interview by questioning my character. How is that not personal? Because it's relevant. Joy shot back. If you're going to sell relationship advice, people have a right to know your relationship history. Fine, Steve said, throwing his hands up in exasperation. Then ask about it professionally. Don't open an interview by calling someone a hypocrite. Don't attack their past marriages like you're trying to embarrass them. Ask real questions, with respect. I don't owe you respect, Joy snapped coldly. You earn respect, Steve replied instantly. The studio went dead silent. Even Joy seemed to realize she had crossed a line. Steve stared at her, chest heaving, eyes blazing. Not with rage now, but with something deeper. Hurt, disappointment, a quiet fury. You know what, Joy? He said slowly, his voice dropping low, calm, controlled, and far more dangerous than shouting. You just told me, on national television, in front of millions of people, that you don't owe me basic human respect. He shook his head slightly, and you're surprised I'm upset. The audience didn't move. No one clapped. No one laughed. The moment hung in the air like a held breath. I walked onto this set with respect for everyone at this table. Steve continued. I showed up prepared to listen, to answer questions, to have a conversation. But what you gave me wasn't conversation. It was contempt. Joy crossed her arms tightly, but her earlier confidence had faded. You want accountability, Steve said. Accountability doesn't mean humiliation. Journalism doesn't mean cruelty. And empowerment doesn't mean tearing someone down to feel superior. The co-hosts avoided eye contact. Producers off camera were visibly panicking. You accused me of not respecting women, Steve continued, but respect goes both ways, and what you showed me today wasn't strength, it was hostility. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For years, Steve said, I've taught people that communication starts with listening. Today you didn't listen. You waited for your moment to attack. The silence was suffocating. I don't mind tough questions, he added. I mind bad faith. I mind disrespect. And I mind being ambushed under the disguise of truth. Joy finally spoke again, quieter this time. You're overreacting. No, Steve replied calmly. I'm reacting exactly as anyone would when they're treated unfairly. He took a deep breath and stepped back from the table. This could have been a meaningful conversation. He said. Instead, it became a spectacle. No one spoke. The audience sat stunned. The co-hosts looked shaken. Joy stared down at the desk, jaw clenched. Daytime television had just crossed into something raw, uncomfortable, and impossible to ignore, and everyone watching, both in the studio and at home, knew they had just witnessed a moment that would be debated long after the cameras stopped rolling.